Chapter 1252, Mr. Clown. When they saw the figure walking out from behind the collapsed tower, the members of the City of Silver's expedition team immediately put up a defensive stance, ready to attack or provide any defense. In their eyes, the man wearing strange clothes and a strange hat was equivalent to a monster, a particularly terrifying one at that. Even normal Beyonders would view themselves as monsters after being subject to such a physical mutation. Upon seeing the reactions of the half-giants, Klein grinned widely and said with a beaming smile, "Hello everyone, I'm J.M. Sparrow. All of you should be glad that I can still control myself. Otherwise, you would have lost your minds because you looked at me directly." As he spoke, the transparent maggots on the left side of his face and neck were still squirming slowly. Beneath the clothes on the left side of his body, there were protruding marks that gently squirmed. A monster. The members of the City of Silver, who were not demigods, were increasingly certain of their own judgment. You are no, Mr. Sparrow." Derek Berg finally managed to recognize Mr. World, who he had met once. Klein raised his left palm and covered his left cheek. He smiled and said, "Life is always about encountering the unexpected." Without waiting for Little Sun to respond, he paused and said, "I have already opened the door to the Giant King's residence. This brought about some accidents, causing the Divine Kingdom to change. The door to the Giant King's residence has already been opened." The grizzled and scarred Colin Iliad narrowed his eyes. He subconsciously looked up at the magnificent buildings shrouded in golden sunlight. However, due to the distance, he couldn't see the situation at the apex. However, to have the frozen sunset become replaced by the blazing sun at noon had explained many things. Klein's gaze swept across the City of Silver's chief and elder Lovia, who was dressed in black armor, of the six-member council. He then looked at the sun and continued with a smile, "This has also brought me some negative effects, just as you have already noticed." At this point, he clapped his hands and said in a commanding tone, like an adult instructing children, "All right, Beyonders below the level of demigod are to fall back. The Giant King's court after the anomaly is not a place you can enter." The members of the expedition team, apart from Colin, Derek, and Lovia, felt an inexplicable sense of fear as they cast their gazes at the chief. Colin Iliad remained silent for a few seconds before turning to them and saying, "Leave the Giant King's court and wait at the periphery. If you see the signal, immediately act according to plan." The hand-picked expedition team members were not only strong themselves and close in strength to a demigod, but they also had different powerful sealed artifacts that complemented each other. Even if they were facing a saint, they weren't without hope when it came to defeating one. However, in the City of Silver's original plan, they weren't the main force. Therefore, Colin Iliad had led them here in the hope that, when he and the other demigods shaved off the hidden enemies, these team members would be able to shine. They could then use the different sealed artifacts to deal with different incidents, preventing the entire team from suffering from any weaknesses. Now, with powerful help from the outside joining them, and the fact that the Giant King's court had indeed experienced some sort of anomaly, no one knew what they would encounter if they went deeper. With the utmost caution, Colin Iliad believed that J.M. Sparrow's suggestion wasn't a problem. Furthermore, he had his own selfish thoughts. He didn't want members other than the demigods to suffer any unnecessary risks or meaningless casualties. Therefore, he agreed to the opinion of the monster-like powerhouse. When the time came for an opportunity to show itself, he, Lovia, and Derek would be able to give a signal and let the team members rush over a cleared path to provide reinforcements. As for the entire team's Beyonder powers not being able to deal with different situations, due it collectively becoming relatively monotonous, Colin Iliad wasn't too worried since the former shepherd, Lovia, was around. The members of the expedition, who weren't demigods, exchanged looks and hesitated for a moment. In the end, they still chose to listen to Colin Iliad. "Yes, Your Excellency." At the same time that they answered, they gave Derek Berg a deep look, as though they were trying to remind their chief to be careful of this sequence for demigod. He actually knew a living, monster-like powerhouse. This was very suspicious to the residents of the City of Silver, who had barely seen any outsiders. Sensing his companion's obvious distrust, Derek's heart ached as his eyes nearly welled up in tears. But eventually, he didn't make any excuses. He maintained his silence and straightened his back. After the other members of the expedition team retreated from the giant king's court, Klein smiled and pointed at the two demigods. "Let me guess. You must be the chief of the City of Silver, the former demon hunter, the present Silver Knight, Colin Iliad. You are the Hanged Man's believer, Black Knight Luvia, who had helped him shepherd." Luvia's gray eyes, which were hidden behind her visor, narrowed. "You really look like a clown." "The Hanged Man." Upon hearing Mr. World's words, Derek almost doubted his ears. He even imagined that Elder Luvia had something to do with Mr. Hanged Man, but he quickly remembered the exact image of the fallen creator, a naked man hanging upside down on a cross. Mr. World used the Hanged Man to refer to the fallen creator. Elder Luvia chided him for being impolite. Derek, who had just exceeded 2 meters in height, nodded thoughtfully as he praised Mr. World's guts from the bottom of his heart. He actually dared to give a true deity a nickname, and even said it out loud in front of his follower. Colin Iliad looked at Jayaman Sparrow and then at Luvia. Unable to tell who was right or wrong, he calmly said, "Let's continue moving forward." He had already pulled out the 2 swords on his back and allowed them to be blanketed with the dawn's glow. "No problem." With a smile, Klein turned around and walked to the left of a huge stone staircase with the 3 demigods of the City of Silver. After walking for a while, they saw the familiar rugged pathway. On one side of the road was a towering cliff, and on the other side was an afternoon sun-soaked, bottomless cloud. At this moment, Klein and company felt the vibrations of the ground. They saw large amounts of illusory, pitch-black gases surging out from deep within the golden cloud. With a whoosh, the rugged pathway collapsed, falling into the dark, water surface. Beneath the water surface, there seemed to be invisible maelstroms lurking. "Haha, it collapsed. There's no way out. Haha." Klein bent down laughing loudly, making Colin S., Derek's, and Luvia's nerves tense up. It took Klein a few seconds to regain control of his emotions. He straightened his body and took out a piece of white paper from his pocket with a smile plastered across his face. He folded it into a plane. "Phew." He blew at the head of the paper plane, swung his arm, and threw it towards the clouds that had been devoured by darkness. At the same time, the glove on his left hand was covered with slippery fish scales. Upon seeing this scene, the originally confused Colin Iliad nodded slightly before casting his gaze at the flying paper object. A violent wind stirred as it carried the paper plane forward in flight for a few seconds. Then it suddenly dissipated, and like a stone, it rapidly plummeted into the dark clouds without causing any ripples. From the looks of it, flying is useless. Klein turned halfway around and smiled at Derek and company. Luvia didn't respond, as she released a translucent soul that enveloped a piece of gravel. In the blink of an eye, that piece of rock disappeared from its original spot, blinking to a spot above the dark clouds. Following that, it fell down uncontrollably and sank into the clouds. "Teleport doesn't work either," Luvia said in a slightly deep voice. As Klein pressed at his abdomen, he bent down and chuckled before saying, "It looks like we can only enter through the main entrance." Derek immediately turned around and was about to head back when Colin Iliad and Luvia looked at each other and nodded indiscernibly. The 4 demigods quickly returned to the huge, grayish-white stone staircase and looked up. Above the flight of silent stairs, which had very high steps, the majestic city walls were covered with burn marks. There were even arrows shafts as thick as ordinary trees. In the middle of the city wall was a door that was tens of meters tall. It was grayish-blue in color, and there were golden nails embedded on its surface. On both sides of the door stood a guard that stood at 6 meters tall in a domineering manner. They wore exquisite silver full-body armor, one holding a greatsword, the other a huge axe. Behind their visors was an orange glow. Silver Knight. These were 2 Silver Knight's guards. Without wasting any time, Colin Iliad quickly retracted his gaze and said to Jayaman Sparrow, "I'll hold back one of the Silver Knights. Quickly finish off the other one." He wasn't very sure of Jayaman Sparrow's strength, but from the admiration and respect that he sensed from Derek Berg, as well as the fact that he had opened up the residence of the Giant King, he determined that this demigod who was blessed by the Fool was no weaker than him. Under such circumstances, whether it was Jayaman Sparrow or Colin Iliad, it wasn't difficult for them to quickly kill a silver night guard with the help of Luvia and Derek. After all, they weren't living demigods, but a special statue without any intelligence. Just as Colin Iliad finished his sentence, he saw Jayaman Sparrow bend his back and laugh out loud. "Why do you care so much about these two toys? If they were still alive and could think, real silver knights, I would definitely be as cautious as you are. But now, haha, watch." As he spoke, Klein used his left hand, which had many worms of spirit crawling about, to press down on his top hat. He straightened his body and briskly walked up the stairs. Then, he was surrounded by strong winds as he approached the main door of the Giant King's court. During this process, he casually raised his right hand and shook it a few times, as if he was stretching his wrist or grabbing the air. At the end of the last action, Klein's shoulder sank slightly as if it had frozen, but nothing appeared in the void. Colin Iliad originally wanted to have an understanding of Jayaman Sparrow's strength, so he didn't stop him. He only signaled for Luvia to follow, to back him up if he made any mistakes. However, at that moment, he suddenly slowed down. He frowned slightly as if he had caught the scent of something. As for Derek, he looked at him with slight admiration. He believed that Mr. World could quickly finish off the guards.